Right, so this is a video that I've wanted to do for a while now. I'm actually a student at Iowa State studying meteorology, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to do a video on how to predict the weather out in the backcountry when you don't have any cell service. So it's super important to be able to know what the weather is going to be like when you're outdoors because there are a lot of hazards that are related to weather. So like high and low temperatures, precipitation, like flash flooding, lightning, basically all those things. So it's really important to kind of know this as a basic skill and how to forecast weather when you're outside. So to get right into it, we're going to talk about thunderstorms. And if you've ever been in Colorado in the summer, you'd know that you get thunderstorms pretty much every day in the Rockies. And the reason for that is that the mountains are basically creating their own weather. And when you get winds pushing up the slope of the mountain, you get rising air. And when that air rises, it cools off and the moisture in it condenses, and you get these white, puffy cumulus clouds to form. And eventually these clouds can turn into larger cumulus clouds and eventually thunderstorms, and you end up getting these thunderstorms over the mountains pretty much every day in the summer. Now when you start to see these cumulus clouds form, it could be anywhere from like 30 minutes to a couple hours before storms start to form, but it's usually a good indication that you want to get down to a lower spot because there could be a lightning hazard in the near future. One of the bigger factors in predicting whether these storms are going to form or not is whether it's sunny or not. So if it's a sunny day, you're going to get a lot more energy in the air. It's going to be a lot warmer, so it's going to be more likely that thunderstorms are going to form. Whereas if it's cloudy, you're not going to get as much light coming in, so it's not going to warm up, and you'll have a lesser chance of these thunderstorms forming. Another really important thing to know how to forecast is temperature. So one of the main ways to forecast this is to basically look at what the temperature is today and then kind of just expect that it to be the same the next day if no other factors are the same. In meteorology, this is called a persistence forecast. So basically, if there's nothing changing, then you would expect the weather to be exactly the same the next day. But as we all know, weather is not always the same day to day. So there are a few factors you're going to want to look to give kind of an indication of whether that temperature is going to go up or down the next day. And one of the main things is cloud cover. So like a lot of you already know, if it's cloudy in the daytime, you're going to expect it to be a little bit colder than normal. And that's just basically because there's less sunlight hitting the earth, so it's going to warm up less. But it's less commonly known that in the nighttime, it's actually going to be warmer if you have more clouds. And the reason is because the clouds are actually going to trap in that heat from the daytime, and it's going to be a little bit warmer if you have more cloud cover. Whereas if you have clear skies at night, it's actually going to cool down a lot faster. And this is really important if you're out camping in the desert because it can get really cold at night if you have a clear night, whereas if it's a little bit cloudier, it might stay a little bit warmer. And humidity is also really important for forecasting temperature. So in the nighttime, if it's humid, it's going to stay a little bit warmer than normal. And this is basically doing the same thing as cloud cover would, so it's trapping that heat in the atmosphere. In the daytime, it's going to feel obviously hotter if it's humid because you're going to have that higher heat index, and you're going to end up sweating more. So you might be more at risk for heat exhaustion in the event that it's more humid in the daytime. Not a lot of people know this, but winds are actually super important for forecasting temperature. So generally in the US, winds are going to blow from west to east. But if there's a low pressure system, the winds actually circulate around that low. So you get winds blowing north, south, east, and west, depending on which part of the low you're on. And if you've got winds blowing from the north, you're actually pulling in cold air from up north, like in Canada. So it's going to be colder up in Canada, and those north winds are actually going to bring that cold air down. So you're going to expect temperatures to start to fall. And if you've got winds from the south, you're actually going to be bringing in warm air from down south, like in Mexico. So that warm air is actually going to come in and warm up throughout the day. So if you notice the winds are typically out of the north or south, you could expect that temperature to either drop or fall throughout the day based on this. So now let's talk a little bit about clouds. Clouds are super important for forecasting the type of weather that's coming, but it can also get really confusing really quick because there can be a lot of different types of clouds at once. So the first cloud we're going to talk about are cirrus clouds, and when you see just a few cirrus clouds, those really wispy light clouds, that generally means it's going to be pretty good weather, so you're going to be under a high pressure. But then if you see those cirrus clouds start to form more of a sheet, and sometimes you're going to see a halo around the sun or moon, that generally means it's going to be a little more moist in the upper atmosphere, and you could expect some precipitation in the next day or two, probably. If you ever notice that you're starting off with cirrus clouds and they eventually start to get lower and lower and thicker, then that could be an indication that there's a front coming through. And that's kind of important because a front usually brings with it rain and either warmer or colder temperatures. So you might want to be looking out for some bad weather if you see that sort of pattern happening. So moving on to lower clouds, one of the main clouds that you'll see are stratus clouds. And these are basically just a big thick blanket. If you can see a lot of light through these clouds, it's generally not a sign of any rain or anything coming. But if they're pretty dark and thick, especially with that cloud lowering that I mentioned earlier, then you might be expecting some rain in the coming day or so. A lot of times when you get rain with stratus clouds, it's going to be that more steady rain that lasts for hours at a time instead of just those really quick thunderstorms. And one way to tell if that rain is going to last a little bit longer is the wind direction. So looking back at that low pressure, they tend to move west to east across the country. And like I said earlier, the winds are circulating around the low pressure. So on the north end of the low pressure, there's typically a larger area of precipitation, and you've got winds blowing from the east. So one way to tell if your rain is going to last for a longer time is if you've got an easterly wind. Whereas if you're on the south end of the low, you've got that south or westerly wind, you might be getting thunderstorms, and that rain probably wouldn't last as long as it would. So the best way to tell if a low pressure system is moving in is to check a barometer. Now I'm pretty sure no one carries a barometer when they're out hiking or climbing mountains, but a lot of people do carry altimeters. So if you notice that the altimeter is rising when you're not climbing, that's an indication that the pressure is actually lowering. And if you've got a lowering pressure, that means that you've got a low pressure moving in and you could expect some bad weather in the next day or two. If you notice that your altimeter appears to be going down in elevation when you're not moving, then you might expect a high pressure to be moving in and a little bit better weather in the next day or two. And finally, there's something called the lapse rate, and that's basically the rate at which temperature goes down as you go up higher in the atmosphere. And this is really important for when you're climbing taller mountains because the temperature will actually drop about 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit per 1,000 feet you go up. And that's just kind of something to keep in mind when you're hiking in higher elevations, that you're going to want to dress a little bit warmer, wear layers, because it's going to cool down as you go up higher. So I know there's a lot of technical information in this video, but hopefully some of this stuff can help you guys predict the weather when you're out on your trips outdoors. If you've got any cool weather stories, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you on the video next week.